To kick off our evening, I'd like you to give me the opportunity to read our proclamation on Jewish American Heritage Month. We released our first proclamation last year, and this is a revised version, and I hope that it holds what we believe in for Beverly. A proclamation on Jewish American Heritage Month. Whereas Jewish American Heritage Month began as an effort by the Jewish Museum of Florida and South Florida Jewish community leaders through the bipartisan efforts of Representative Debbie Wasserman and the late Senator Alan Specter of Pennsylvania. Jewish American Heritage Month was established in 2006 by President George W. Bush to honor the contributions and achievements of Jewish Americans and to educate all Americans. And whereas the proclamation reads that the Beverly Jewish American experience is a story of faith, fortitude, and progress, it is a quintessential American experience, one that is connected to key tenets of American identity, including our nation's commitment to freedom of religion and conscience. This month, we honor our Beverly Jewish Americans, past and present, who have inextricably woven their experience and their accomplishments into the fabric of the city of Beverly's identity. And whereas the Jewish community has helped define the city of Beverly's character and values through core Jewish beliefs, including the importance of education in the lives of children, and after resolutions passed unanimously in both houses of Congress, President George W. Bush proclaimed that May would be Jewish American Heritage Month to recognize the more than 350-year history of Jewish contributions throughout our history, society, and culture in science, medicine, literature, the arts, sports, business, technology, civil rights, government, and military service, and have played a central role in the creation, growth, freedom, prosperity, and strength of the United States of America. And whereas according to the Anti-Defamation League, U.S. anti-Semitic incidents soared 140% in 2023, the highest level recorded since ADL started tracking this data in 1979. In the Commonwealth alone, there were reported 440 anti-Semitic incidents in 2023. We, as a city, take the rise of anti-Semitism seriously, and whereas on November 16, 2022, the city of Beverly endorsed the working definition of anti-Semitism established by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which has been expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. And in our city, we endorse this working definition. I and the City Council, and on behalf of Mayor, and all the citizens of the city of Beverly take cognizance of this definition and the threat that anti-Semitism poses to our community. And whereas we believe that the antidote of anti-Semitism aims to teach Jewish history and heritage and to create tangible touch points with Jewish people and culture, by learning about real people, we seek to build community, inspire Jews and non-Jews alike, and challenge anti-Semitism beliefs. Whereas to commemorate and honor the Jewish community, the city of Beverly encourages its residents to learn about the contributions, hardships, immigration stories, culinary and musical traditions, varied beliefs and lifestyles of Jewish Americans in our city, in North Shore, and in our country. Now, therefore, on behalf of Mayor Michael K. Hill, do hereby declare and proclaim May 2024 as Jewish American Heritage Month. Furthermore, I ask my colleagues of the Beverly City Council, as well as all schools and colleges in our city, to join us in commemorating this occasion. I will request that all city government offices make announcements and post relevant information. Additionally, encourage all city museums, historical societies to host programs related to the occasion. Thank you so much for your time. Working on a proclamation is a process between city government, community partners, our residents, and it's a process that we take seriously to make sure that we are all contributing to the work that we are trying to build together for a more connected Beverly's. Thank you for being here, and with your permission, I'd like to welcome Rabbi Adler for some opening remarks.
As a student of history, good evening. Hi. How many of you grew up on the North Shore? How many of you grew up in Beverly? Woo! How many of you wish you had grown up in Beverly? At least I'm raising my son here, so anyway, we love it here. And when we first came, one of the things I loved is I received a copy of a book that was put together for Tefel B'nai Abraham's 100th anniversary. I was able to learn a bit of the history. Also, Alan Pierce was the president of the synagogue, and you're going to be hearing from him, and he's very passionate about Jewish history in the North Shore. And as the first woman of a synagogue that was over 100 years old, it was really humbling, but also the community itself is such a warm and wonderful community, and it's only what it is today because of all the people who came before. I mean, that's always true in a community, right? And so I love hearing the stories. I love meeting people who grew up here and talk about how they used to come in the front door and then leave through the back door when it was Hebrew school time and not stay. And their parents never knew, or what, I don't know. You know, all very different kinds of stories of people who grew up here. And that's how that all builds on who we are today. And I really want to thank you, Wangari. I want to thank Mayor Cahill and everybody else who is here, members of the Multi-Faith Coalition who are here. That's it. Raise your hands. And a few of you. There's a few more. So, right. And we got a few city councilors. So thank you both for being here. And other city leaders. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Alan and Paul.
Thank you, Rabbi. I'm Alan Pierce, as she so graciously introduced me. A little bit intimidated here seeing all these friendly faces. All the faces are friendly faces, even though friends I have not yet met and hope to by the end of the evening. I'm a little intimidated because we see a lot of our Jewish friends here who possess equal, if not more, knowledge about growing up Jewish in Beverly than perhaps I do. But, you know, Paul and I are going to do this together. We're trying to figure out the logistics between Paul and I sharing a microphone and trying to advance the slides. And so we were, you know, trying to get a panel together, and Rabbi Adler came to me after Wangari and the mayor's office contacted her because they wanted to put a program like this together. And, you know, we're going to talk about the Jewish history in Beverly, and whether you are here as Jews or here as not being Jewish, but have a cultural and ethnic identity. A lot of what we say and what you see today will resonate with you. The Jewish experience in the United States is not terribly different at all than the Greek experience or the Italian experience or many of the other immigrant groups that came here, especially during the major impetus of immigration beginning around 1880 and continuing to around 1914. So, you know, I was trying to, as we were putting this slide together, I was trying to get a picture of Paul and I. I'm going to just sort of reach over. The best I could come up with. I can't think. The best I could come up with. So, getting past that, you know, where did we come from? You know, a lot of the Irish came here, you know, there was a potato famine, and, you know, there was all sorts of economic and non-economic problems going on in a variety of countries from which their population came to the United States. The immigration experience we're going to talk about are primarily the immigration experience that really started in Beverly, the latter part of the 19th century going into the early part of the 20th century. The real heyday for immigration was from Eastern Europe, It was from Jewish population that are known as Ashkenazi Jews, as opposed to Sephardic Jews, those of you who don't know the difference. Different brands of Judaism, depending on where folks came from and settled. The Sephardic Jews primarily were from the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, and other parts of Western and Northern Europe. And the Sephardic Jews were primarily Eastern European Jews, sort of going from Germany to what became known as the Pale of Settlement, Western Europe. So the vast concentration of our ancestors came from here, which is, depending on the border and the time the borders were looked at, was Poland, what's today is the Ukraine, Lithuania, Belarus, Latvia, a variety of Eastern European countries. And we saw that in that painting, we saw two people carrying Torahs. Actually, we haven't seen a painting. Oh, we did. Yeah. That's a painting that I first saw as a child. First I thought it was more biblical, but once I got a little older and I looked at the garb, I realized these were probably shtetl Eastern European Jews fleeing something going on with the Torahs, which they are reverently carrying wrapped in tallit, prayer shawls, from somewhere. And they're probably, my imagination tells me, they're probably carrying them from a synagogue that is either being burnt to the ground or is going to be under attack. And there is this conception that the wave of immigration, particularly from the Jews of Eastern Europe, came here in direct response to the pogroms, the violence perpetrated against them as individuals, the slaughters, the injuries, and also the destruction of towns. That isn't entirely true. Certainly that was part of it, but pogroms have been going on long before the 1880s and continued and beyond the 1880s. What was happening in the United States at that time was this country was moving from an agrarian to an industrial society. Cities were being built, railroads needed to be built, buildings needed to be built. The steam engine was invented, the internal combustion engine was invented. It was a lot easier to get from Europe and that part of the world to the United States in a big steamer as opposed to a sailing ship. And we needed labor. So I would postulate that it was primarily economic. People came here for a better life for themselves. There was that, and I think we've all heard this in our families, there was this belief that among our grandparents on third generation and our great-grandparents, they were told that the streets in America were paved with gold. And when they got here, I think they were certainly of the realization that indeed the streets were not paved in gold. However, as it became readily apparent through our experience and the experience of the other immigrants that came here, the entire country of America was paved with opportunity. And it was that opportunity that created gold, that created the prosperity that we all identified with. So I'm going to call upon Paul as we advance through this to dive a little deeper. Yeah. And this is a sketch of the north end of Boston. This is Salem Street, heavily Italian, heavily pizza places and restaurants and markets. But this was at the very turn of the century. This was a very Jewish neighborhood. If you could read some of the signs and then the photo from which this came from, they were in Hebrew. So this was, the Jews came to the cities and they settled in neighborhoods. So tell us about how they came to Beverly.
Well, excuse me if you see me getting up and sitting down. A back problem doesn't let me stand for too long. I have to lean and then I have to sit. So I would like to back up just a little bit also, that when you talk to Jews today who know anything about their background in Europe, example, filling out, when I went into the service, filling out all the forms for when I had to fill out all the forms for security clearance, and actually even before that, I had to give details about where my parents came from. For most, it was just putting down, born in Springfield, Massachusetts, such and such a date. Anybody whose parents were born outside the country, it was a little more detailed. Where passport number, citizenship, things of that sort. Both of my parents came to the United States from Europe. I always listed their places of birth as Russia. Only in the last 10, 15 years did I realize now I probably need to say Ukraine. Scrolling today through a genealogical group on Facebook, there was somebody who said, I found out that my great-grandparents came from Ukraine. So why do we have all of these letters in High German? Well, they came from an area that at one point was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The people there didn't speak Yiddish. They spoke German and Hebrew to an extent. So those borders that you saw on the map were very, very fluid. And even today, you will find, if you ask folks, where did your family come from? It's going to depend if they found the town on the map, and where is it now? So that may be different from what it was 20 years ago. My parents came over to this country. My mother was brought here as an 11-month-old infant from Kiev in what is now Ukraine. My father came at age 11 from what is still called Shepetovka, which was a major railhead and a very significant place for Jews, very large Jewish population percentage-wise. Almost totally killed by the Germans. There are very few who made it. Some got to Siberia. I think when it comes to what Ellen was saying about seeking a better way of life, also we need to keep in mind that the Jews in the Pale of Settlement, that is in the East, where Jews were required to live and couldn't go out of that area, they also could not engage in many of the trades and professions. They were barred. By coming to the United States, their children wouldn't have an opportunity for any of the professions or trades. But one of the things in Europe that Jews were allowed to do was to run taverns and pubs. Our early days, as we'll see when we go through the list, many of the immigrants, the Jewish immigrants, ran bars in Beverly. It was in the background. That was what they were allowed to do, so that is what they do. And also, I expect other families would say to their children here in the United States, as my parents said to me, get a profession. Once it's in your head, once the education is there, the specialization, it can never be taken away from you, even if you are chased out and you have to go somewhere else. So this was ingrained coming over. And what was the other thing you wanted to know? It'll come to me. Oh, by the way, Alan is the play-by-play. I'm the color guy. I just fill in with the color. Another way of putting it is, he is the realist and I am the impressionist. I'd be popping up from time to time to give you some of my reflections on what I remember growing up in Beverly as a Jew, and things that I don't know today the youngsters think about, but we were always well aware of being in a separate category.
And toward that end, I am going to, as a lawyer, I'm going to issue a disclaimer. We can't speak without issuing any disclaimers. Most, if not all of what you hear from me is not necessarily the product of my own research or scholarship. I am basically assembling and bringing to you what I have been able to learn from people like Elaine Iserson, who's sort of the de facto unofficial historian of Temple Beit Abraham and a longtime member of the Jewish community, and our beloved Ralph Edelstein, who has written and spoken so eloquently about growing up in Beverly, and the late Joe Rubenstein, who I did not have the pleasure of knowing the Rubenstein family, but you'll hear more about them from Paul. So with that disclaimer, I suppose I can't take credit for any of the information that I delivered to you today, but neither should I get the blame for any errors, which it could be one or two. But Paul was referring to, coming to Beverly. And Bob Brilliant spoke to me the other day, and he said, "Could you answer me a question? Why did Jews go to Lynn? Why did they go to Peabody? Why did they come to Beverly?" You know, and there's no easy answer to that question. The obvious answer for the large Jewish influx of population at the relevant period of time we're talking about was the shoe industry. Lynn was the shoe capital, along with Brockton in Massachusetts, of literally the United States, if not a great part of the world. So there were hundreds, dozens, if not 100 or more shoe factories, plenty of jobs. Peabody, very similar. It was the leather capital of the world. There was a big influx of Jews from those regions in the Pale of Settlement. And a lot of them came because fellow townspeople were there first. Beverly, however, didn't really have a single industry. And as we peruse the jobs and occupations a little later, we'll sort of come back to the point that Paul made. But our beloved Elaine Israelson, in one of her writings, said, most of the Jews who came to Beverly were just passing through to get to somebody else. And that was the way it pretty much was. There was a slight Jewish presence in Lynn, going back to the 1850s, German Jews. And there was a Jewish presence even in the United States in colonial times. And even in Christopher Columbus's crew, it's rumored there were some Jews from the Iberian Peninsula. And a lot of Jews came to the United States in the 1700s seeking religious freedom. We saw a lot of Jews coming from the Netherlands and those parts of Northern and Western Europe for religious freedom, and they're primarily Sephardic. We have the Toro Synagogue in Newport, which is one of the oldest synagogues, and they were from people who came here before George Washington, before the Revolution. But the first Jews that Elaine Israelson tells us that came to Beverly were Nicholas and Becky Zielinski, and they came in 1898. I don't know what happened with the Zielinski family. We never talked about it, and Paul doesn't seem to recollect. And then a year later, Barnett and Annie Albert, and they went to 61 Park, 71 and Park Street, respectively. It looks like the first Jewish child born in Beverly was Barney and Annie's son Sam, who was born January 24, 1889. When Jews come to any place and settle, they create institutions, both to help themselves and help each other. And because Jews are more than just a cultural and ethnic group, it's a religion, it's a religious group. And what is the major glue that holds this community together? It is the synagogue, the shul, the temple, whatever you call it. And as soon as they got here, whether it was the Zielinskis, Alberts, and the ones that came following them in the late 1880s, 1890s, it became apparent that they needed to meet somewhere and hold prayers. This is the first building in which they took some space. This is the Burnham Hall at 131 Cabot Street, and services were held there. And at that time, there were either 2 or 3 congregations, depending. There was Congregation Sons of Abraham, Congregation Sons of Abraham and Isaac. Somewhere there's some reference to Congregation Israel. But there was a merger of all 2 or all 3 shortly thereafter. So after they could no longer hold services for 3 years at 131 Cabot, which, by the way, just for your reference, this is where it is today. It's Cabot. I think that's Lucky Gardens might have been Barney's, and I see Sarah Zita here that will have some residents because Barney's Bar, as all said, was owned by Barney Morris and run by Saul Friedland and Sarah Minnie, per. But it was right over there. The congregations got its own place, its own shul. They rented a room at 71 Rantoul Street in the Wood Building. And then in 1911, land was purchased at 37 Bow Street, and it became the Bow Street Shul. And that was purchased in 1911, and the congregation moved in there thereafter. And there, not only was there a synagogue, but there was also a community center. So Paul, you have some memories, because my memories do not go back to Bow Street, but yours certainly do.
Actually, I will add also that 1, 2, 3 synagogues in Beverly, with certainly at the start and for a small Jewish population, it is said, it's a common saying, that every community has to have more than 1 synagogue, because there has to be one that the person would not be caught dead in. Additionally, among the many divisions within Jewry, 2 of the major divisions that we found in this area were what were called the Russische, which was basically the Russian and Polish, and the Litvaks, who were the Lithuanians. There were two very different strains of belief and teaching and study, and they also spoke Yiddish differently. And my guess is that way back, they tried to have synagogues both for the Litvaks and the Russische. Eventually, they came, I know during my very early childhood, there were, I won't identify them, two men, old men when I was a child, who at religious services, or before actually, would argue with each other, very raised voices, looking at the calendar as to which prayers you say on which holidays or which days leading up to holidays, that sort of thing. There was a great big chart, totally written in Hebrew and in Yiddish, very small print. And they would go back to it, and they'd point, one would point, and then the other would point over here, and they'd go argue. One of my very earliest memories.
We're creating.
Oh, yes, talking about the community center. First of all, the fire that was in Beverly, I think it was just towards the very end of the war, World War II.
February 45.
February of 45, thank you, it was very there were two buildings, but they were possibly joined. I don't remember if Diane Eisenberg were here, she probably would remember. The synagogue was set in back. You just went down to it, I thought. The synagogue is that building on the right, set back a little bit. The community center was the building on the left. And after the fire, when it was rebuilt, there was one building that was built. By the way, there's the great story of the fire. There was a conflagration that was made out of wood. It was a horrendous fire in Beverly. And a couple of the congregants who lived right by just broke through the firemen and went racing into the flames and brought out every one of the Torah scrolls, not touched by the fire, neither the Tzibur nor the Torah scrolls. And we still have those scrolls today. Especially after the rebuilding, which is my era, it was called the Hebrew Community Center. We kids never referred to it as the synagogue or the synagogue with the name Sons of Abraham. It was the Hebrew Community Center, which happened also to have the synagogue on the second floor, the main sanctuary, and a chapel on the first floor. It's where we went for religious school 3 times a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. Plus the fact going to junior congregation religious services on Saturday. But it really was a center of activity. First of all, you have to remember this was still a time where Jews weren't always welcome, mixing with other kids at established locations. So we had Sunday afternoons, dance class. We used to go for ballroom dancing, and many other things that were at the Hebrew Community Center. Over time, the name began to become Sons of Abraham. But that was where a lot of things centered. A lot of the women's activities were there. This was also during a day where you had a much larger percentage of the women who were stay-at-home mothers. And they were amazing because they kept this congregation going with all of their volunteers. And
we're going to keep going. Stay here, Paul. So that cornerstone that I showed you the past slide, that was the building at Bow Street in 1913 when the building was consecrated or put into use. The Beverly Evening Times in 1908, we just liked it because of the choice of words. It basically indicates that papers will be issued tonight, which will incorporate the local colony of Hebrews. Well, now we're going to go this year. We were the local colony of Hebrews. And I think that kind of points out that we were somewhat different than a lot of the other immigrant groups that came here. Both our language, our customs, even our occurrences, our traditions, our foods, were even a little bit different than the other ethnic groups that came here as well. So as Paul said, we did have a great life during the early part of the century, assimilating into Beverly. This is a group of folks in 1912, members of the congregation. It's here called Riff Abraham members. So they came from more than just Beverly. But many of you may or may not know that President Taft, who's in this photo, had a summer home here in Beverly. And they were visiting him at his home on Corning Street. And I think that home had to be he moved, and eventually that home, he told me the story was sort of cut in half and transported out of it from Marble.
The one that is where Lynch Park is now. There was a home. He went to, as I recall, he went to Corning Street after the owner of the house at the Lynch Park lived. After he was there, she hated him as a tenant. He was not a good tenant, apparently. She had the house sawed in half, cut totally in half, and the house was taken by barge to Marblehead.
Now you have photographs of this.
Yeah. So when he was coming back for the following summer, he didn't have a place to stay. And I think that's when he went to Corning Street. What's that? Parramatta?
Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, you pipe in, there are folks here who know some of these facts a lot better than either of us. So,
you know who that is?
that's the Rosenbluth.
Those are the Rosenblums. They were a Jewish family back in the turn of 1920s, and they took they'd been a pretty exotic trip to the Middle East, and then that was in the British Mandate in 1928. And it was a photo they took and brought back with them. He owned a lot of real estate, apartments, and other buildings up and down a commercial center, which was both Rantall and Habit Street.
Zelda Rosenblum is the one who will always have a place in the Weinberg family history, because at age 6, I think it was, I gave her a mighty kick in the shins. And I always, they were friends of my parents, and I punished for that when I found out later on that my mother and father laughed like hell because they agreed she deserved it. Going back to parting story, my parents with their parents briefly were in Boston when they first arrived in the country, one in 1921, the other in 1911, or 12 rather. Then their parents went to the suburbs, Chelsea, there, 1 square mile, but it was not in the city of Boston. They were getting away from Boston. They were able to buy homes, some of them after a while. 1 square mile, almost totally immigrants. And I think back in the 20s and 30s, probably at least 75% Jewish immigrants. There were many, Sarah remembers, there were Armenians. My grandmother, who never spoke a word of English, except eat. She had a friend on Hurd Street in Chelsea who was an Armenian lady who also spoke not a word of English and no other language. And these two women would get together and have tea. By the way, you had tea from a glass.
Yeah.
And you had a hard lump of sugar that you kept in your cheek. And you would sip the tea with acid. Anyway, the two women would sit and have tea together and talk to each other. Neither one knew what the other was saying, but both of them did know what the other was saying. And it was a welcoming community among immigrants. Speaking of immigrants, as far as Beverly is concerned, and I've only realized this fairly recent years, that we kids, and apparently the generation ahead of us, had a special relationship with the Italian population in Beverly. to my recollection, when the boys came back from World War II and had the Jewish War Veterans Post, which was also located out of the Hebrew community center, I believe that they used to regularly have softball games with the Italian veterans of World War II. And in fact, it is also in the records that the Jewish War Veterans Post was the prime assistant to getting Vittorio Rocchi Italian-American Veterans Post chartered, and they got them going. And there was, until the Beverly Vets Post had to fold, there was always a very warm relationship between the two. And thinking back, we did have something in common. We had more in common with the Italian kids growing up than we did with the old Yankees, that's for certain. The old Yankees were not readily accepting of immigrants.
Just brought back a memory for me. I grew up in Peabody. I had a very similar experience a few years later than all, but my grandparents also came from Russia. They came to Peabody specifically for leather. My grandfather worked in the leather industry, or basically in the leather factories. And he lived in a double-decker in downtown Peabody. Upstairs were the Gravelisons, a wonderful Greek family. Downstairs were my Bobby, I was 80. And I, too, would go to my grandmother's house, and I would be hit by aromas. I would first smell the Jewish cooking going on downstairs, and pretty soon I was smelling the Greek cooking going on upstairs. But on occasion, I'd come by, and my grandmother was talking to Mrs. Gravelis. And I didn't understand a word they were saying, and perhaps they didn't either. But they were sharing a common life story. So that is not unique. And, you know, Peabody is similar in which our sort of ethnic group, who we identified with, were the Greeks in Peabody and the Portuguese. Strong Portuguese concentration, a lot from the Azores, not from the mainland. Very strong Greek. Again, they came because people from those towns and villages also came, the jobs were there, etc. So, you know, going back to one of those first slides of the people rescuing those Torahs from a synagogue that was under some type of threat, that is central to the theme of how important the Torah is. And this picture was taken in 1948 when the Bow Street Shoal was rebuilt. And the centerpiece of welcoming that space as a spiritual space again was to bring the Torahs again and in a procession. So that, we believe, is a Rosenberg, not good, no, is not.
And either Bill or it was the Hall Axe. Yep. No. Okay. Okay. I couldn't tell that you could do it. And that's Rabbi Destin at the front, as I recall.
And again, a variety of the congregation, the names perhaps lost except for the memory.
The fellow in the bow tie was Al Coe, who was a state representative from that.
And I asked my cousin Sarah Zito when I got here if she could confirm that her grandfather-in-law, Jerry's grandfather, and my uncle Barney ran Barney's.
Annie Sturman,
And just to advance a few decades after that, one of the great honors in my life in Donna's land was that, and maybe we can have a rabbi talk about the rescued Torah from the Holocaust. This Torah that we are carrying into the sanctuary at Temple Ben Abraham was saved from the Holocaust. There was a Torah project that was, you know, the Germans, for all the horror and terrible things they did, one of the perversions in their quest for whatever they were seeking to do, they were preserving a lot of artifacts for whatever reason they might have had to do so. And somewhere along the line in the 1960s, an entire treasure trove of Torahs from the German-occupied land in 1930, the mid-30s till the end of the war, and a group came to rescue these and place them into synagogues. So, Rabbi, we originally were told, when we adopted this Torah, it came from the town of Brno, B-R-N-O. We just recently learned it came from where?
I believe it's Nasperovsky, something I can't remember. It's a place about 45 miles north, small town, that just happens to have a small, spectacularly beautiful synagogue that do not see pictures, so please let me know and I'll pick if there are only 14 of the 2,000 some Jews that went there and that survived the Holocaust. But the local communities and the marvelous job they have in the museum with all the names from the German log books. They have like this. They've done with one job, and they restored the synagogue, which the Nazis.
Yeah. I mean, that's not an 80-year-old Torah. That's 4 or 5, several hundred years old. Sure.
So
And as the cliche goes, from the sublime to the ridiculous, you see those pews? The same pews you saw in 1947, the prior picture. 1947. And about a year, maybe 2 years ago, Rabbi Adler said, in essence, enough! And they're gone. But those were the same pews. Those were the same pews all those years. And we have chairs.
I noticed that the men and women are sitting together. Did that happen right from the start?
No, that happened from the start of the new building.
In the old building that burnt down, there was a balcony. The women sat in the balcony. The men were down below. Very common among the Orthodox Jews, even today. Not always a balcony, but a separation with a screen or some kind of separation. My earliest recollections of the building that was built in 47, built and dedicated 47, sorry. The women were on the left side of the center aisle. The men were on the right side. Now, I may be just a little bit off, but the first person I can remember going and sitting with his wife on the women's side was Herman Kirchner. His family came to Beverly. They got out of Germany in 1938. They lost a factory, a home, everything that the family had built up. And Herman, I am told that Herman Kirchner's comment was, I did not get away from the Nazis to be separated from my wife in this country. And very, very quickly, after 47, more and more there was mixing. There were still a few who kept to one side or the other, but not too many. So I would say by the mid to late 50s, probably, the seating was almost totally mixed.
Do you have a question?
No, that's not a question. When I was a kid, any of the 15-story patrol at Close Street, we still had a wooden cell, but it was no longer used exclusively for women.
Thanks.
I don't remember a gallery in the new building
I do.
Close Street. Was it in the back or on the side? I thought that was just...
show on Bedford Street. There wasn't one in on
Bedford Street,
on both streets. It wasn't it was the third floor, but it was used as
All right, here we go. Definitely a Jewish roots.
I've only been there since 1944, and my memory can be quite wrong.
In any event, somehow we made it through the Depression. We made it through World War II, now without some sacrifice and some hardship. But I believe in World War II, there were 100 families in Beverly. There were 60 boys and young ladies, men and women, that served in the armed forces. 100 families, 60 service boats. 2 did not come back. You want to have a say a word about the Zaskar and Goldberg, 2 war heroes, and whom the Jewish war vets was named.
Many of the Jewish men and women were quick to go into the armed forces or be working here in the defense industry, so to speak, to support the war. 2 of them were, do we have any direct relatives? Stacy Ames. I don't know if Stacy's here. I can't see with that. I think over. Oh, yeah.
Are you talking about Saul Goldberg?
Yes, your great uncle, is that recall?
yes, he was I have
Oh, your uncle. You found yeah. Saul Goldberg was in the Army. The Japanese overran the Philippines, and he was on the Bataan Death March. For any of you that know your history, a very large percentage perished along the way. I do not remember how many miles and how many days it was force marched under the Japanese rifles. Many of them were just shot if they fell by the side. There was virtually no food or water except what they could scrounge during brief rest periods. He made it all the way to the prison camp at the end of the Bataan Death March. And then he died at the prison camp, as we have heard, from lack of nourishment and lack of medical care. But he did make it all the way. Zassman was a sailor on the, as I recall, the USS Indianapolis, which was sunk by, I'm sorry?
Ben Frank.
I keep thinking it was the Indianapolis, and I should have checked that out before coming. But I believe something like 750 sailors drowned when the ship was sunk by the Japanese, and he was one of them. Their bodies were never recovered, but in the cemetery on Cole Street, there are two memorial plaques, one on either side of the flag, right in the front, so that they won't be forgotten. And there are squares in Beverly that are named after them and have markers.
During World War II, actually, Sons of Abraham, congregation as it was then known, published a weekly or monthly newsletter that was sent to the troops overseas. It was called, and my Yiddish is not very good, was
Heftig.
or it was Hexik, which means what's buzzing, what's doing. It's a weekly, W-E-A-K-L-Y effort to keep you informed spasmodically. And it was typed, looks like the old mimeograph machines. I almost wanted to sniff the mimeograph thing. And it basically was the gossip, the happenings, what was going on. In fact, I was perusing some of these here. I'll leave this if you want to look for it. And we lost one of our bold stalwarts in Beverly, Marshall Sturman, a few weeks ago. And I was looking through one of these, and they were announcing his bar mitzvah. Now, he was I think, 92 when he died last month or a month or two ago. But that type of stuff is still maintained at TVA, and it's just delightful that they would take the time. And in fact, here's the list of all the Beverly service people, the so-called honor roll here. So, after World War II, things changed in America. They certainly changed in Beverly. Populations changed. Land was developed. Suburbs sort of grew even within Beverly. People no longer had to walk to get to Shoal, as was the custom. And the population was increasing. And the wooden synagogue, even the rebuilt one in 1947 and 48, really was no longer meeting the needs of the greater Beverly Jewish community. So beginning around 1959, 1960, the Sons of Abraham, which is what the name changed to, or Congregation Sons of Abraham, but it was Sons of Abraham, it became Temple B'nai Abraham, and a building drive was established to raise, looks like $200,000 to build the synagogue building that we still enjoy today at 200 East Lothrop Street. I don't know everybody in this picture, but this is Dave Gordon. He owned Gordon Realty in Peabody, owned most of the commercial and residential apartment spaces on Main Street with Peabody's. And this is Jack Weissman. Dave might have been chair of the building committee. Jack, who owned Gaudreau Woodworking at the corner of Corning. And that's Max Rubinstein, was it? Yeah, he had the store, and we'll get to him in a moment. But they raised the money with a mortgage to build the building that we now know today, that we are celebrating. That is Temple B'nai Abraham at 200 East Lothrop Street. Very much a typical synagogue temple that was post-World War II, sort of, I would call it late 20th century modern. And not unlike a lot of other synagogues or temples that you see in a lot of suburban communities. And that cornerstone that you saw, you will find it on the other side of those doors in the garden in front of the synagogue. People from Beverly, anybody here Eddie Duchin? Right, well, there's a gentleman here who is recording us. His name is Jay Duchin. I was surprised to learn Eddie Duchin was a society band leader, jazz performer primarily in the 40s and 50s. It's an interesting story, apparently. It's interesting enough that Hollywood not only produced a movie, but somebody like Tyrone Power played Eddie Duchin, and Kim Novak played his wife. But he actually grew up in Beverly, and I think he grew up right across the street where Gloria Foods is, right in one of those buildings. But he moved out of Beverly, but is quite well known. And some of you may have known of Alfred Marshall. Al Marshall was a longtime resident in Beverly. He opened a little shop, and then I had Paul talk about shopping at his store in North Beverly. But as you may know, lived on as Marshall's.
I believe it was the very first Marshall's that was built in North Beverly, up about next door to where the Stop and Shop is now, where that strip mall there, and it was set back a bit. And I remember my mother taking me there. No idea what the year might have been, but two things hit me as unusual. First of all, the original Marshalls had bins.
Yeah.
And you would, just like Feline's basement, and you would go through all the stuff in the particular bin, looking for the right size, the right color, because the price was right if you found the right size and the right color. And the other thing, it was the first time I ever saw it that I can remember at a store. Way off to one side, there was a coffee pot for customers. That may seem like nothing to you now, but I thought to myself, what a nice thing to do for your customers. Big coffee pot, cups, milk, whatever. And that was the first Marshalls. When Al finally sold the place, he retained two of them. One in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I think it was I'm not sure which. It was not St. Thomas. And the other one was somewhere just a little bit further down in the Caribbean. Where are you? At Puerto Rico, was it? Okay. And I believe those two are still there. They are not part of the Marshalls chain, though.
Stay up there all.
You have a question over here.
Not only did Jews,
Please have your says it.
Before you slipped completely into the 1960s, could you please explain what was involved in creating the cemetery?
we're getting right to that. That's the very next slide. So let's go back to the 1940s.
Can I ask a question about the 50s?
I grew up on Bedford Street next to what I believe was an Orthodox synagogue. You haven't mentioned that.
Yeah, I think, but I'm not positive, that may have represented a split between the Litvaks, the ones who followed the Lithuanian tradition, and the Russische, the ones who followed in general the Russian. I believe, I cannot say that for sure, but what happened there was they just were not thriving at all. The members died off very quickly, and I think by about maybe 1960 or somewhere in there, I can't say for sure, the last one died. And he was just, I don't know that he was doing anything, that the building was not being used. And my recollection is there were no survivors. There was nothing in writing as to what would happen with the building. I believe the Orthodox rabbinate in Boston came out and made arrangements with the state or the city, and they took over the property and finished closing it down totally.
Oh, I believe it was Park. I believe there was a fire here because some of the people from there came over to our sector.
And one of the comments I made about, we're going to have some opportunity afterwards to take some questions, have some further dialogue. Let's see if we can get to the few remaining slides, and we can open it up for a more relaxed conversation. So you mentioned the cemetery. Of course, Jews came here, we thrived, we raised families, but we also started to die. And we had no burial place. So we have land on Cole Street, was purchased in the mid-40s to be developed into a cemetery, but there was a problem. And this problem wound its way through the court system for probably most of the middle part of the 1940s. Paul, you want to just tell us a little bit about how the Supreme Judicial Court finally resolved that?
Yeah, the land probably, I haven't gone back to the original deeds, but I think the land was made available before World War II, just before World War II. And the synagogue was trying to get the okay to have a cemetery. It had to be zoned for cemetery usage. There were problems all along. The city fathers and a good number of people in the city fought tooth and nail to keep from having a Jewish synagogue, a Jewish cemetery in Beverly. Back around the turn of the century, the early beginning of the 1900s, remember when Jews came here, there was nothing. They formed a community. Jewish communities are based on three things: a three-legged stool, worship, education of the children, and a place to bury the dead. From the beginning, where they could not get any place in Beverly, they made arrangements mostly with the synagogue in Salem, and the early Beverly Jews are mostly buried off of Route 114. You may know there's an area of a bunch of Jewish cemeteries. They picked up the farmland very early on. There were a few people to object. This went in Beverly. It went all the way through the courts, through the politicians. We still have, I think I still have one copy of a letter, well, the original letter from a citizen of Beverly, fighting and telling the city council, don't let this happen in Beverly. Finally, the last battle was over a fairly simple zoning matter as to whether or not the Board of Health could allow burials on land like that where there was some water flow, something like that, not about whether or not there could be a cemetery. And it finally went to the Supreme Judicial Court. In 1947, they cleared the last hurdle, and the city was at that point required to let it go ahead. The report I got from one of the people who was a founder of the cemetery, I headed up the cemetery for 25 years. One of the people ahead before me said that one of the city founders or fathers in City Hall, when all had been lost on their side, finally said, fine, go ahead, I don't care if they bury all the Jews there. So there were a lot of people who really did not want that cemetery, and we had whatever that. I am told that the day after the Supreme Judicial Court handed down its decision, the people who had been working to try and get the cemetery set up went out there with a box filled with some some sacred objects, prayer books, quickly buried it so it would become a consecrated piece of property for a Jewish cemetery, just so nothing else could happen to keep them from having the cemetery. We now have, in the main part of the cemetery, 1,000 graves mapped out, of which I would say about 900 are either containing burials or have been sold for eventual burials. And then there is further land all the way back to the railroad tracks that can be used, some on the right side of the cemetery. And on the left side, we had a very large acreage of land already zoned for cemetery usage. And the city of Beverly, about 10 or 15 years ago, bought that from us for a city cemetery. They were expecting that the city cemeteries were about to be filled to capacity and they needed more land. Within a year after they purchased the land, the city told me there was an amazing reversal of numbers. And all of a sudden, most of the burials that wanted to be in Beverly City cemeteries were cremations and did not require the land that they thought they were going to use. Now, I don't know, but I'm told there's something going on. It may be now the city is getting ready to be considering it for cemetery usage. up until this past year, I think it was garden area for residents to be able to grow flowers, vegetables, whatever they wanted.
Bob, before we go to the last couple of slides, which I think you're going to enjoy, because we're going to really talk about the merchants, the businesses in Beverly that many of you remember. But to the point you made about the difficulty getting the cemetery approved, tell us about your experience, if any, with anti-Semitism. We, of course, were living together with other ethnic groups, and there was always, of course, the banter and the friction, but did you experience any real anti-Semitism on a personal level?
I did not experience direct face-to-face anti-Semitism until I got to college. In Beverly, there was anti-Semitism. It was almost institutionalized. There was a particular outdoor activity that was very much sought after by Beverly citizens. It was a wonderful location. But Jews could not belong. At Jubilee Yacht Club. Yeah, all right. And Jews could not belong. And I remember being invited. Once a year they had Visitors' Day. I was in the school, and one of the other kids who was a member there, they used to have boats called turnabouts, just little sailboats, cute things, and fun to be out on. And one of the kids asked me if I wanted to go there. It was Visitors' Day coming up, and I can remember my position was, why would I want to go someplace one day a year that won't have any other 364? So it was. And Beverly went through, or the area went through the same thing with golf courses, places of public accommodation, I think, but I cannot cite specific examples. In the schools, the institutional anti-Semitism, I don't believe was true anti-Semitism. It was more a lack of sensitivity. Starting that kid out in the first grade, reciting every morning with all the other kids, the Lord's Prayer. Which Lord is it? It's in the New Testament, which is not part of the Jewish scriptures, but we did. Singing hymns on occasion. We always had a Bible reading every morning right before saluting the flag. The Bible reading might be from the Old Testament, if you will, the Jewish scripture, or it might be from the New Testament. As often as not, it was back and forth. Come Christmas time, the Jewish kids, I know the ones I was with, we always were trying to figure out what to do, singing wonderful Christmas carols when we got to a proclamation of Jesus is our Lord. And nobody thought about, or at least we never heard about anybody complaining about it. And I say, that I don't believe was anti-Semitism. I think that was a lack of sensitivity, that the institutions had not yet gotten used to the idea that there were other people around. So,
Stu, if I would just say, I mean, I'm not quite as old as you, but I mean, I went to
Nobody is.
that was school prayer stuff and everything else. And I will say, as a Jewish kid, I proudly never learned the correct words any Christmas carol. And I still don't know the correct words.
I think there are some beautiful carols, but I knew where to stop with the words, with some.
But close school prayer went away when I was the side of rain. That was just pretty 40s.
So you remember when we started, we talked about, and Jews came to Peabody for leather, went to Lynn for shoes. They went to other cities because there was a dominant economic engine that was driving. Beverly, not so much. But as Paul said, because of where our ancestors came from and the trades that they brought with them, they transferred that here, and they very much had an entrepreneurial spirit. Not only did they go to work, but they soon bought and owned their own business. So I got the next two slides are from the Beverly City Directory in 1910. So we're really going back 114 years, and maybe 5 or 10 years after most of these folks got here. And if you just take a look, we have Matisoff the tailor, Katz Brothers Men's Furnishing, Weiss Dry Goods, Rosenthal Boots and Shoes. I told Schul Company, I'm not sure if this is Jewish, this is stated directly, it says Star Brothers. Do we know if that's in Jewish? I don't think Star or Jewish. We have Baron Tailoring, Willis Goldberg Boot and Repair. So we have real Jason, Joe Simon, and is that Mo Simon's brothers? Yeah, Simon Film. So you can see, really 5, 10, maybe 15 years after they got off the boat, not only were they practicing their trade, they hung out of shingles. They were doing business. They were next door to Luigi the tailor and Louis and the barber and the groceries. And Kransberg junk dealer, Arnie Alpert, secondhand furniture, letter metals, American Coke and Charcoal, and B. Silverman and Fine Groceries. Now the city directory went on and on. I didn't make copies of all, but these were the businesses that our grandparents shopped at. If we go ahead, these next two slides aren't easy to read. This is a list of the various businesses. So why don't they do this, Paul? Why don't I just kind of go through some of the familiar names and maybe you have an anecdote or two, I thought. We have, of course, Sandy's Lounge. Sandy Berman then started out as a liquor store, and then it became a famous jazz joint. Tell us about it.
Yeah, the Bermans, they were important people to Beverly, even though they weren't elected to anything. But Sandy Berman's mother used to open up her house down by Dane Street Beach, just off of Lovett Street, to the musicians who had been performing at the jazz club. And among the people who performed at Sandy's was Louis Armstrong. And Louis, I am told, looked forward to finishing the sets for the night and going down to Mrs. Berman's house, and she would cook for all of the musicians, 3 of them wanting thereabouts. So yeah, and that was Sandy's Lounge when they took that down, when they closed it down, that was a great loss for a lot of people with jazz background or who like jazz. I'm going to put in my 2 cents also. Sam Weinberg, Quality Cleansers and Dyers at 200 Rantoul Street. That was the last location. My father's, and he was not the same one that was Sam's Cleaners. Sam's Cleaners came along later. Totally separate bunch of folks.
And
actually, for better or worse, one of the reasons my father was not drafted during World War II was all the cleaners around that had the equipment, the wholesalers, had been drafted and their businesses had closed down. My father was the last remaining wholesaler that was supporting a whole bunch of retail dry cleaning places throughout the North Shore. And they said he could not be drafted. His partner had been, and my father was the last one, and he employed about 20 or so people who would have been out of work. But yeah, so anybody that remembers Quality Cleansers.
So as we walk up and down Cabot Street on either side of City Hall, we're going to see Sandy's Lounge, Axelrod's Variety, lawyer by the name of Bernstein's, Hodash Variety, Louis Grossman the Tailor, Barnes' Bar, Alcon's, Shirley's Boutique, Ranikoff's Barbershop, William Charles Studio, George Chansky, Paul Resnick Lawyers, Gillespie, of course, Gillespie Firm, Dr. Bendrick, Margolis Brothers Automotive, Cantor Shoes, Mo Simon, Stop and Shop, which was originally a Jewish business that became a big corporate entity, Silver's Boutique, Goldberg's Restaurant, Harry and Tilly, Dr. Margolis, the optometrist, Sid's Donut Shop, Halburn Fruit Market, can't read that, Letterman's Camera Shop. And just continuing down, Toll's Coffee Shop. I won't go through all of them, but you can see dentists and doctors, drugstores, shoe repair, Garden City Bowling. Of course, we had Kransberg's. And what are some of your memories of some of the places that you folks shopped under my 12?
Do you remember the popcorn factory? Saratoga popcorn. And the whole area had this wonderful aroma all around for a block or so or two. when they were making the popcorn. And the specific thing, the only product I remember, and they had a bunch of them, they made popcorn blocks. Oh, yeah, we're getting some nods. They were solid. They glued together, I think, by honey or sugar water or something. And they were tricolored. And then they were wrapped in a clear cellophane. And when my father had to make a stop there at the popcorn factory, it was a great day for my brother and me because he'd come home with a few of those blocks of popcorn. So how many do remember Saratoga popcorn? Oh yeah, got some good numbers. Kranzberg's furniture. And you may have seen it earlier that in the early 1900s, Kranzberg junk dealer went on, and then it became a family of furniture folks. The Davidsons. Do you remember Davidson's department store? Warren was the son. I forget the father's name.
It was Nate.
Nate.
Two Davis.
Okay. After school, when I was at the Hardy School, which is now the Hardy Building, Montserrat College, I was in grammar school. We would race over there if it wasn't a Hebrew school day. We would race over to Davidson's. Boy, the owner he had such a foresight. All the kids would go in there, maybe 15, 20 kids. We'd spread out on the floor in front of the television set that he had. This is about 1947, thereabouts 48. We left it on, and of course, you're going to have these 6, 7, 8-year-old kids go home and say, Dad, why can't we have one of those? It was good salesmanship. We would go in there and hang out and watch the Western movies that they would play in the afternoons on the television stations. Other places, well, of course, much later on, not Jewish connected, except I think the Beverly Jews loved going there. Ted's Lunch. I remember Ted's Lunch. And then the restaurant that came after the lunch counter when he expanded to the next building. Just a very vibrant area, Grand Tool Street, Cabot Street, with the businesses like these.
And we can't forget Sturman Taxi and Bars, and I mean, there's so many. I'm sure we're leaving some out.
Can I tell?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just want to tell a story about Sturman's Taxi that a few of you have heard me relate. My parents came out. My father came out to Beverly from Chelsea and set up his business in 1923, 33 at age 23. By 1943, he was starting to think this is where he wanted to raise his family. We had a marvelous superintendent of school on both sides of the war named Starr M. Ken. And he had Beverly in the very topmost echelons of schools in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Great school system. The people wanted to come to Beverly for that. That was part of why we came here. Where was I just going with that? Thank you. It does happen when you get old enough. Sturman's Taxi, they had a little shack right down on the post office side of the railroad tracks, of the train depot. And they would dispatch taxis from there. They had their telephones. I don't know that there were radios at that time. My father's mother, was still living in Chelsea. She knew how to buy a ticket for the train. That she did. And just about 2 blocks from her house was the Chelsea train station. She would walk up there, she would get the train, get off in Beverly, and invariably, one of the men from Sturman's would rush over to her and say, "Oh, Mrs. Weinberg, please come with us. We've got your ride waiting." And they would take her to my parents' house. She never paid. And I don't think she ever knew that my father was paying for it. But for her to be recognized by name in the United States, getting off a train, one of those, what a country. So, but the Sturmans were like that with other people too. It was a great family business. And I felt quite bad when we lost them. Jay,
We had Abe Serval was my grandfather, and they had the very first two-way radios in the area. So they
Yeah.
did have two-way radios.
I just couldn't remember what year. That's
I have a wonderful, huge, 3-foot, 4-foot wide picture of all the taxis lined up and the shack and camper and all. Like, is accoutrement that you would add to the outside.
They were a great family. Yeah.
Before I go to the final slide, I'm captivated by this. Just take a look at this for a moment. This was April of 1931. This is the Depression. Two owners of Saratoga, is it Harry Dolan? Dolan. And Morris Toll. Now, I don't know how long they could have been in this country in order to not only establish a company like this, but look at this building. This is not a little small mom and pop store. This is a very good size, looks like a brick building on Park Street. And look what they're doing there in the Depression. They're selling. I mean, how much effort went into selling a box of shortcakes for $1 to Elmira, New York? But this is how we made a living. I'd like to close really by talking about why we're here tonight. We are living in a country where there was more division than there has ever been. And there is more, whether it's on the political side or just on the social side. But we really need to remember, with all the debate about immigration and open borders, when people came here, this was before the Immigration Reform Act of 1924. The borders were open. They were open for a purpose. We needed labor, we needed people, we needed to grow the country. And since then, I don't know what's happened, but we need to really recognize each other's culture. It isn't just Jewish American Heritage Month or Black Heritage Month or Gay Month. It should be a month for everybody. So why are we here to remember all of this? And I think it's important because I don't think we can move forward until we have an understanding of where we've been. So I'd like to close with a paragraph which I wish I had written. It comes from a video called Reasons to Remember. It's a video that was put together by the Jewish Historical Society of the North Shore and the Lynn Historical Society. It's part of a project to commemorate the Jewish history of Lynn, which is not unlike this. And I'd like to close by those words by Steve Cohen. The photographs have faded. The names are long forgotten. The streets and buildings which once echoed with the sounds of life have vanished. It's easy to forget the past, easier still to ignore the simple fact that one day the fabric of our lives, our work, our dreams, will become the threads of some distant history. But there are reasons to remember, because somewhere amidst these fading images, forgotten names, vanishing streets, we find ourselves. And though it's easy to forget, we remember. Because in these photos, in these memories, it is a portrait of a community, our community. We learn ourselves not only who we were, but who we are. So I want to thank you for coming, learning with us, helping us learn from you. So we're looking for
Please, one more clap for Paul and Ellen. How are we doing? I'm hoping that I don't have to take the grapes home. So do keep snacking. I know that we need some energy. Today, we have a special guest with us from the high school. Her name is Gabrielle Wickery, and I was just telling her how her name sounds like my name, Wanderi and Wickery. But one great honor we have here in the city of Beverly is opportunity for community connectedness, and also the relationship we have between government, residents, community partners, our students, our schools. And I was hoping that this becomes an opportunity for us to pass this from one generation to another, of course honoring the reason to remember and continue to pass these beautiful stories that live so well in each and every one of you. I just enjoyed sitting there and listening to everyone kind of going back and forth in this really wonderful, beautiful city of ours. So I'd like to welcome Gabrielle to share a comment on whatever is in her mind.
Hello everyone, so my name is Gabby. Thank you for the welcome, and I learned so much tonight, so I want to thank you guys and you all. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what I'm doing at the high school right now. So obviously, as you touched on, right now it's a very important time to be discussing all of this, as since October 7th it has been tough. So we're currently at the high school. I've realized recently that the Beverly High School is one of the only schools in the North Shore that does not have a Jewish student union. So it has been my goal this past year to start a Jewish student union within the community. That has been on its way, and I'm really excited that we're going to be having a Jewish student union starting the fall of 2024 for the next school year. So I'm very, very excited for that. And then we're going to be having a discussion on anti-Semitism in the fall that I'll be hosting. I just had a conversation with my principal this morning. So I'm really excited for that as well, just to make sure that we continue the growth that we've talked about recently. And today, as I mentioned, it's very important for now that we put an end to anti-Semitism the best that we can. And, but yeah, I'm really proud. I'm now president of the North Shore BBYO, which is a B'nai B'rith youth organization. So I'm trying to make my ways the best I can. I'm only one person, but I hope that the rest of the community will follow my footsteps. So, yeah.
Thank you, Gabby, for your dedication in continuing this dream. That we have an opportunity for a little informal reception, Q&A, but as we move forward, I welcome openness. I welcome you to a brave space. Speak for yourself and yourself only, and reach out and connect. Welcome again.
All right. We'll field some questions. We'll have some conversations.
Yeah,
I'll try to repeat the questions.
I had a question. You've skipped the Depression, the period between the wars, and that was a time of almost parallel to what's happening now in anti-Semitism. The country had a huge rise in anti-Semitism with people like Father Coughlin and Lindbergh and others, Henry Ford, who were pushing it in the United States. How did Beverly deal with both the Depression and the rise of the labor movement at the same time in Beverly, as well as the Depression at the same, as well as the anti-Semitism growing in the country?
Again, I'm not sure how much the likes of Father Coughlin had an effect on a daily basis or just a real basis in these communities, but certainly there was a lot of that going on. There was a lot of controversy, obviously, around Charles Lindbergh and a lot of those feelings, especially in the 30s when things were steaming up in Europe. Paul, do you have any remembrance of what your folks might have talked about in the 30s in this entity?
I know with my father being in business from 33 on, that I noticed later on when we were living in Beverly, my father kept a low profile politically. The family home where I am still, 1944 till today. Next month it'll be 80 years that we died in that house and in Beverly. Never had a political sign, except the one exception he made, and that was probably in the 60s or 70s. Our neighbor down the street, Fran Alexander, with Mrs. Alexander's school. Fran came to my father and asked if she could have him sign put in the yard, and my father said yes. Other than that, my father never spoke of anything politically or anything that was, what would you say, strife producing in the area. And my guess is that's how it was during that part of the Depression. That I think more than likely, my speculation, during the Depression with Father Coughlin and the like, that the Jews in this area probably were similar to being Jews in the Deep South during the demonstrations and such for black rights, civil rights, and that is you just keep a low profile. I can tell you, and this is why I think I know how my father was. I went off to college, and there was something going on that was, again, lack of sensitivity to Jewish students. And I, at that point, was the president of the Jewish Student Organization. And I came home on a weekend. This was at Dartmouth, for those that don't know. Came home for the weekend. I was telling my father, all right, we're getting ready now. We haven't gotten anything from the administration. We're getting ready now to start contacting the Board of Trustees individually. And when they come up for their meeting, we're going to go knocking on their doors in the Hanover Inn. And my father's comment was, well, he said, remember, this country has given us so much already. Be careful about making waves because it could happen here too. And my response was, because I had great respect for his opinion, I said, but now I am benefiting from your having come here. And I, as an American, have the right to make my voice heard and demand equal treatment. And so there was that generational difference between my father and me. I think he finally, after I was there in the service, and he saw me presiding in court as a judge in the service, I think he started to come around a little more to my way of thinking. But that's a long answer to the question, and why I'm speculating that the Jews just kind of kept a low profile.
Yeah, that's the question being sure. Yeah, I'm just trying to ask about you thinking about the civil rights movement of the 60s and how the community reacted to that. Was there a consensus that supported it, or were on the fence? Do you have any memories about that?
I was in college. I wasn't in Beverly at that time. I was in college. I was back here, summers and such. I don't remember busloads going from Beverly down south to take part in any of the marches. I think Beverly was supportive of civil rights, but I don't think that the people of Beverly, this is just my reaction or reflection, I don't think people in Beverly were out there aggressively. Some of my fellow students at Dartmouth, yes, they were. They got
Quite a few in Boston too.
I'm sorry?
There were quite a few of it.
Yeah, I'm sure. You know, Beverly was quiet and separately. So I have no strong memories of any of that. I was there 16. Rich Lincoln is also just about the same as me, or maybe in Beverly's and Lawson's.
The attitude in Beverly was not a problem. Yes, the civil rights culture didn't really touch Beverly until the 70s or later.
Well, I would say in Peabody, which again I felt there are a great deal of similarities, similarly sized town, probably a similarly sized Jewish community. I graduated high school in a class of 440 people. I would say 90% of us were from various ethnic groups. We had one black student graduate with us. We had no Hispanic students. We had Portuguese, Greek, Irish, Polish, Jewish, and that was pretty much it. So we didn't have a lot of black faces that we saw. And what I do remember my grandparents talking about was the McCarthy era. A lot of the Jews that came over from Russia were very, what we call left-leaning, very progressive. Of course, they had no economic, or further. My grandfather, I am told, was a lookout for a Bolshevik group in the forests. And he came here in 1912. I mean, there was this before the revolution. There was a small revolution in 14 in Russia, and then 1917, 1918. But Bolsheviks weren't really the Bolsheviks or the Russians, the communists we think of. They were reacting to an oppressive regime from Tsars, and they were looking for economic activity. The interesting thing is the Jews that came to Peabody and developed factories that became capitalists still had the political persuasion that they brought with them. And there was this interesting dynamic between the leather workers, like my dad and my grandfather, who sat in pews in Shul next to the Kirsteins and the Korns and the stalls of these names that were already gathering a great deal of wealth, they got along famously as employer-employee and a vibrant labor union of not only Jewish leather workers, but all leather workers. There was this harmony between union and management. And I think a lot of it came from the experience of the Jews that came here, being buried left to the earth.
And Beverly, Beverly was very similar in many ways to Peabody. I believe there were two black families, and one of them was intermarried. There was one Asian family. Ginger Chin was the daughter, brilliant girl that was a year or two ahead of me in high school. Did you remember Ginger? Okay, Curve.
She wasn't in my class, and
Okay.
there were no blacks. The only black was he. But
Well, no,
there were no blacks.
the manuals
And
back in the schools. Yeah, we leaving up with you in our class. But
Even Chelsea, we had a
Ginger Chin's family owned the Chinese restaurant in North Beverly that's right at Chinaland. I think, was it maybe even before 128 was extended that far. But other than that, this was a lily white community.
I had one black kid. He was I graduating class in 1968, as he had been recruited by the track coach to move to Sale from Sale rather because he was so fast.
you like enough like that. Probably
Other questions about any of this? We're going to hang around for a bit also. Go ahead.
Paul,
Yep.
I remember Paul and I graduated from Beverly High School still. And I think you and I won the American Legion. But,
Yes, we did.
what was,
Good Susan.
yeah. And I remember your mother coming up to my mother and saying, Mrs. Clinton. So this crop. I just remember that the Jewish kids in our class were some of the most well-liked, accepted kids in the class.
There was a bubble of the Jewish kids.
Yeah.
And the one age group I was in, the few classes ahead of us did not have as many, and the ones in back of us didn't have as many. My graduating class at Beverly High School, 3 of the 4 class officers were Jewish.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I say I never experienced anti-Semitism.
There was 7 behind. Sorry.
There were what?
You know what? It's different. It gets it.
There were seven Jewish people in my class. In this class between us, there's only 3.
Beverly has a luncheon every year at the Dadras and Danvers Port Yacht Club for people who have graduated Beverly High School 50 years and more. My class gets a couple of tables. We're dwindling now. But in past years, a few of us would get together, and the question was, which table is going to be our Hebrew school class table?
It's
We did sit together. We grew up together. Anyhow, that's, what a wonderful community to grow up in. Beverly was just phenomenal. On the tip of the age of innocence still. Drugs, no. I mean, the bad thing to do in town was, as far as what I was told, was to hang out at Murray's Pool Hall.
Yeah.
That was a rough crowd, Murray's Pool, and they smoked. The high school kids smoked in there, and that was a rough place. Do you remember Marty's?
My father would not let my brother, who was much younger than I, go there.
My brother disobeyed my parents, and he went there. I never did. I was whatever it's all nice. And you remember Alcon's? You do remember where Alcon's was? Okay, with the machine where you'd step up and you look at the X-ray of your feet, and you could see the bones, and that's how you checked out if the shoe you were trying on was right through your feet. You could see the bones. Okay, and before we knew that exposure to X-rays over a period. Maybe that's why I've got no see. But below, let's see, the old Beverly Heights, below Alcon, what was down there? Oh, what was there? Lenswick bowling alleys with the pin boys because there were no pin setters.
There was also pizza point.
It was well, not in the basement, I don't think. You
used to have to walk down. You have to walk down the stairs for the pizza place until they moved. I forget that.
I never had money to go out and buy pizza. Remember upstairs of Alcon? Anybody?
Yes. Yeah. I was wondering what you would like for us to take home today when you leave, or what should we be thinking about in terms of what Beverly looked like when you were growing up, where we are now, maybe what you would also like to see in the future.
Good shit.
I'd love to see a return of even kids, as I did, on a summer's day, would get on our bikes first thing in the morning with a sack lunch. We'd go and meet at the Cove Playground, decide, all boys, of course, at that point, age 10 and 12 were there, and decide where are we going today? What are we going to do? Where are we going to go and eat our lunch? We just had to be back home when it started to get dark. And I'd like to sit down and, come true again for the kids. Let them have that kind of an upbringing, explore, be on their own without being in danger. Yeah. And the other thing I just point out to those who are not part of the Jewish community, we got to the point where we as individuals have been categorized as lawyers, psychologists, administrators, and now we're starting to look a little bit like 1938, where people are starting to be wondering, well, how many Jewish grandparents did you have? Being categorized that way, I am seeing it. I'd like to see Beverly go back to where we are judged as individuals and our attributes and what we bring to the community, and not who our grandparents were, because that's what the break.
Amen.